Hello and welcome back to AEF TV in association with Engerati. We're now joined by David Humphrey, who's from Standard Bank. I can't read your job title, but that'll be on online later. David, sorry. Thank you for taking the time to be here, and thank you for joining us here in the studio. And we're talking a little bit off air, and I was telling you about how we've had sort of conversations in other interviews where ministers from countries are saying, well, we're creating this framework for transparency and investment because we want to give investors confidence. You're sat on the other side of the fence. So my natural question to you is, well, there are two natural questions. One is enough being done? And what would you like to see more of to give you that confidence to go out there and invest?
Okay, thanks. Well, I mean, the first point is that we are investing. So, as Standard Bank, we're sort of one of the largest banks in Africa by assets, and we're present in 18 countries across sub-Saharan Africa, basically all the way from South Africa, which is where we're headquartered, up to South Sudan, going north, and then going west up to Ghana and Nigeria, and basically all countries south of the Congo. So we are investing. And we're investing very much in the energy space, and I head up the power and infrastructure sector for the bank. But what's interesting for me as a sort of, and I have to stand back and try and drive a strategy for our bank. And I think there are two main things that come out. One is that the absolute size of investment going into this sector is on the increase. And the second is that what you were talking about, which was the need for transparency, is slowly but surely coming about. It's uneven. It varies by country. But essentially what we as investors are looking at, especially when you're looking at energy projects where you're producing power to be bought by an off-taker, which is usually government sponsored. So you're very much dealing with an organ of government as the intermediary between the end consumer and the producer of power. And we get involved really with the independent power producers who need private capital, and that's what we're an intermediary of capital, private capital. If a project needs capital and we can lend to it, we will. Now, what does it require to lend? Well, you need three basic things. You need good governance out of a country, you need good legislation, and you need good regulation. And I think it's pretty fair to say that has a correlation with good governance. Now, the governance doesn't necessarily have to be democracy in the sort of Western sense of the world. It doesn't have to be American, it doesn't have to be French, it doesn't have to be British.
It just needs to be consistent, maybe?
It needs to be a good form of governance.
Right.
And, one-party states can have good governance. China. I mean, we don't mind investing in China. And other parts of the world, it varies. But in Africa, where we're seeing, hotspots, as I like to call them, Ghana, Kenya, Uganda going the right way, Tanzania going the right way, Namibia, Botswana both developed, Zambia going the right way, Mozambique starting off, Angola starting off but going the right way. I mean, I think you can sort of get a feeling from what I'm saying is that
some of the things going the right way.
Yes, I can't. I mean, I think there are a few countries which are still at the difficult edge, which haven't made progress yet. But even in places like Zimbabwe, we're doing quite a lot of business. So it's not impossible, and I can't really put a finger on one particular country and say, oh, we're not going to go there. Nigeria as well, I think is very exciting. We didn't mention that. They've got the privatisation process there, and the BPE, which is a privatisation body, is setting about that enormous task of getting transparency, a contractual framework that works, clear obligation on who is buying, who is selling, what is the rate at which you buy, what are your protections, if something goes wrong, how is debt going to be, not taking an equity risk. All those issues are getting addressed. It's taking time, but is it going the right way? Absolutely. And I think that's, for this conference, and I think it's a trend that we're seeing now. It's one of, I think, positive optimism, actually.
Yeah, and that's what I get a sense of, because some of the earlier interviews, well, look, certainly, while people were talking to me, what came across was a genuine desire to create that framework to enable that investment to happen and
Yes,
things like that. Because some of these states actually don't have the money to do it themselves, or don't have the natural resources that they could then push into something else.
It's once you go into the economics of it, it's actually quite complex, and it varies by region and by the natural resource base of each individual country and the degree to which that resource base has been exploited. And of course, the most mature is South Africa, where you've got a fully integrated and developed energy sector into which we've just put a lot of money on the renewables side. But even there, it took 7 years really for the government to get the regulatory and legal framework sorted out. But once they decided they were going to press the green button, by goodness, they got on with it. And we've now had 2 rounds there. And we've put in or underwritten, a pretty chunky amount of money, several billion rands worth.
And there seems to be a real commitment to that renewables piece as well in South Africa.
Yeah, no, that's here to stay. Yeah. And the idea is you'll get 1 round every year now for at least the next 4 to 5 years. And the nice thing about renewables, it's 18 months to 2 years before you stop building to where you start getting energy into the grid. So it is actually going to augment South Africa's energy needs nicely in the next few years. But going north, you can see the same pattern appearing in Kenya, which is probably the next market. We're just about to close 3 deals there: 2 thermal, 1 renewable this year. And I think those are the first real IPPs that we've seen there. So, as I say, it's exciting.
And one of the other questions, just as a tangent, because I was reading a fairly detailed report where there was a survey done of, I think it was like over 500 sort of execs in this area who are looking at investment into Africa, and one of the there was a strange, quite large demarcations between when you ask companies that have a heritage of being in Africa in terms of barriers to investment and things like that, to companies that are new to investing in Africa, where the fear factor seems quite polar opposite. What would you say to someone who, I don't want you to give too much advice to your competition, but someone who's looking at that continent for the first time, what lens should they look at it through?
Well, again, that's a difficult question, because it does vary by jurisdiction. And if you go and look at doing a deal in Botswana, which is rated A- and is a very stable, long-standing democracy, you can reply to a tender, and it's probably the same, roughly, as doing a tender anywhere else in the Western world. Yeah. The issue there is, is the execution and deliverability, because actually Botswana's a small country, and so things take time because it is small, as opposed to can they do it. Then you go to someone like Nigeria, which is very complex, and what I do think, and I think it is where us as a bank, we're not just a financial intermediary. We are an intermediary in the cultural and business and commercial sense as well. And we have long-standing teams who can actually guide new investors and help new investors through the way of doing things in Africa. And generally speaking, it starts with learning patience. It does take time, but equally, when you think about it, it took the UK, 5 or 6 years before electricity privatisation was up and running, and it's gone through several metamorphoses since. Yeah. So I think we get impatient because we think, well, I've got something to sell, and it's an easy product, but then you've still got to put it into the regulatory, legal and governance framework.
And that, well,
And then we're back to where I started.
Yeah, I think that impatience. I think we're living in an impatient world. And
We are.
and we
We
can.
But it's interesting, you can live the impatience in the telecoms area. So basically, most of Africa went bypass fixed line, bypass second generation phones,
Straight 3G mobile.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's there, and you can do it. Whereas, unfortunately, the infrastructure required with electricity has not really changed since Mr. Watt.
Exactly. There's physics and chemistry involved, which ain't going to
Well,
change, is it?
You can't get rid of the copper cables. So
Yeah.
whether it's Inga 3, whether it's your 20 megawatt plant in Tanzania, whether it's a hydro in Zambia, you still need to build the infrastructure around the project. And it takes time.
Can I just touch very quickly on Inga 3? Just very quickly. Only because it's like I've done a lot of interviews, and Inga comes up, and it's usually met with two distinct reactions.
Yes.
Either a complete skepticism of like, I've heard that for 10 years, ain't going to happen. It's almost like a bit of a joke.
Yes.
And the other thing of people who are really pushing and saying we got to solve it. Where do you think Inga
Well, the truth's
3
probably
is?
somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit like it's there, and it's probably the single largest hydro potential. I think even bigger than the Three Gorges. So they're talking 40, 60 gigawatts out of one project, which is enormous.
Yes.
So, but then you've got to say, well, where does those 40, 60 gigawatts go? And so you'd rather outrun your, it's like getting to the end of a 100-meter baton race, and you've left the baton 50 yards behind. You've got to go at the speed of the continent. Yeah. So I think they're talking about Inga 3 being phased, fine, but you're really talking about a hub south and west really towards Zambia, the Copper Belt, and then on into Zimbabwe and then South Africa. That's 2,500 Ks.
Yeah.
And it's going to cost you 2 to 3 billion to build that.
Well, you need that transmission grid.
Anyway,
all that power's got to go somewhere.
So you've got to build that as first off, and then can you then up the amount of power put through? Of course you could. And Eskom is actually signed an MOU recently saying that it really wants to do it. And the Chinese are very, very keen to build the infrastructure. So look, it's at the end of the day, all of these things don't happen because the economics aren't quite there yet.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's just wait and see if the economics get there.
Yeah.
Or one of the donor nations really is prepared to write a big check
and just
do
take
it
long term.
Yeah. I mean, I think Africa is slightly different to China. I mean, the Chinese experience is build it and the demand will follow. And you've only got to go to Shanghai or to Beijing and just see it. You see things going up and you're living it. Whereas in Africa, it's not. There's the potentials there, but you've got to get over that self-sustaining.
And China is hugely different because it's a huge piece of land under one central control, so you can actually do all that planning. Whereas you're talking about nation states here, where you actually were like, hang on, if all of this clump was under one thing, we could probably do that sort of thing. So we're getting to the end of our time here. Let me ask you one situational question, seeing as we are at AEF. What are some of the things you're looking forward to getting out of this event in terms of connections and things like that?
Well, I think that is the word. It's connections, and it's great to meet your customers, your clients, and also just to network, because it's very important that the industry gets together annually, whether it's at the Mining Indaba for the mining sector, whether it's AEF. I think we should call it the Energy Indaba, by the way.
Well,
but whatever it is, this has got to be the focal place for everyone to come and actually talk business and get business done. Because that's the great thing about Indaba. But we've got a meeting room here. We'll be full up and seeing clients. So
that's
for us,
great.
It is good, and it's getting momentum as the place, the annual place to be.
And Now we got to let the audience into the little joke, because when I looked down and I saw your job title, it is Global Sector Head, Power and Infrastructure, Mining, Energy and Infrastructure. So you've won the prize of
Have
having
I?
about
The longest title, but no, the mining, that's well, I'm just a sector head.
Yeah.
We have 3 core sectors: P&I, oil and gas, and mining and metals. But we actually, because of the overlap between all 3 sectors,
Yes.
we call it MEI.
Right.
So, a lot of our infrastructure, particularly on the rail side, is intimately integrated with what happens in the mining space.
Yeah.
And then you talk about pipelines for the oil and gas. That's infrastructure, but it's also oil and gas.
And all of these things are big and they take time. So
and they need, and what you need is integrated teams you can combine, and that's. Advertising, that's one of the things that Standard Bank does best. We're an integrated team. I head up P&I, but equally, and I look at myself as part of a mining team and as an oil and gas team as well. We work together.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. And David, thanks for taking the time, and thank you for watching.